Welcome to Shattered Borders, Operation Tidal Wave and the Battle for Central Florida. I'm Sean King, your host and the Media Network Director for J&Washington. Today, I'm joined by David, founder and owner of J&Washington, CEO of Door to Door I4. As the founder and CEO of J&Washington, David brings a formidable 35-year track record to the forefront of political innovation. Unlike traditional strategists who rely solely on surface-level data, David leverages a unique background in behavioral health to understand the deeper psychological motivators of the electorate. He applies the science of why we act to the art of how we vote. Next, I'm joined by Kellen Clark, Operations Director, an aspiring lawyer and University of Central Florida graduate in advertising and public relations. Kevin is driven by a singular mission: to reconnect the public with their government. He operates on the belief that effective policy begins with effective communication. At J&Washington, he translates this passion into action, expanding public resources and sharpening outreach strategies for office holders and candidates.
Thank you for having me, Sean.
And last but not least, we're joined by Kevin Dufresne, social media associate. Kevin, as a social media associate, is the pulse of our outreach to emerging demographics. He translates J&Washington's high-level behavioral insights into engaging, persuasive social content and podcast narratives. Passionate about local politics and community engagement, Kevin ensures our message doesn't just reach the boardroom, but resonates with diverse interest groups and the next generation of decision makers.
Thank you, Sean.
And of course, and again, I'm Sean King, your Media Network Director. January 21st, 2026. Across the United States, the air is thick with tension. From the frozen streets of Minneapolis to the sun-drenched suburbs of Orlando, a massive federal machinery is in motion. They're calling it Operational Tidal Wave. Governor DeSantis calls it a huge success, citing over 10,000 arrests. Congressman Maxwell Frost calls it a siege, confirming ICE is occupying local hotels as staging areas. Today, we look at the clash between national security and civil liberties. We're joined again by David, Kellen, and Kevin to break down the riots, the raids, and why the University of Central Florida has become a ground zero for this movement. This is a special edition of the panel. Let's dive in. Okay, so let's start with the images coming out of Minnesota. We've seen anti-ICE rioters clashing with federal agents and a specific focus on church protests in Minnesota, sanctuary spaces being challenged for the first time in years. Kellen, the scenes in Minneapolis show a community at a breaking point. Protesters are putting their bodies between ICE agents and church doors. From a civil rights perspective, is this the inevitable result of Operation Tidal Wave here in Central Florida, or has the protest moving across a line into lawlessness? So I'm seeing both perspectives here. We have something going on in Minneapolis, and the civil rights, you can argue from the point of the church, from those who are worshiping in a place of worship. Now, my question is, are we looking this from, could this translate into something in Florida? How can we prevent this to happen in Florida? And where do you feel that the civil liberties are being violated? Because we have those who are anti-ICE saying that there are American citizens being detained and arrested and their civil liberties are not being honored. And now we have worshipers being violated of their own religious freedom. From your perspective, who is at fault here? Who's actually being violated?
Sure. So there have been some incidents. I'll kind of start with the lawlessness point of view first before talking whether or not it's inevitable. There's been some incidents involving protesters in Minnesota. There was an incident where an ICE officer was attacked by a dude with a shovel, who was then shot in the leg and put into the hospital. He's fine now. He'll go on trial. And then there's been two, from what I've found, two serious incidents at churches. One where ICE agents were blocked, the people were moved. That was about 10 or so people. And then another one where the church service itself was disrupted by trespassers. Nobody was hurt, but the DOJ is looking to put charges. Now, Minnesota law enforcement does estimate that there at one point at the apex, there were close to 10,000 protests, which is quite the number. as far as lawlessness goes, there are incidents of it. There are instances, but as a whole, these protests have been taking place on traditional or designated public forums. And if they have been disruptive, they had a note from the city, like permission from the city, because you can disrupt a little bit if the city gives you permission. As a whole, I would say this has generally been pretty lawful. The noses have been generally clean. The group as a whole, I would say, has been acting fine. And in individual instances where they're not, action is being taken against them, which is what should happen. You asked whether or not this kind of action was inevitable, and I would say action should have been expected from the people of Minneapolis. If you look throughout American history, a lot of our biggest, most powerful protests start with either an act of violence or distrust in government or law enforcement. Think a lot of how a lot of civil rights things moved on, things like Emmett Till, Rosa Parks, until more recently, the Black Lives Matter protests. A lot of big protests for Vietnam. That's another example. If people don't trust their government, people don't trust their law enforcement, that's what brings people. That's probably the most aggressive way to get people to go on. And right now, you got to put yourself in the shoes of the Minnesotans. In their community, somebody was shot who was not posing a threat, regardless of whether you think the first shot was justified or not. They were not posing a threat. We've been seeing now this year, last year we saw single digits of officers choking people, which is a crime. And now in this month alone, we've seen almost 40 cases at least. So there's this distrust of, are people being held accountable? And we've been learning more about the hiring process, and it's looking a little inconsistent. We've been looking at, who's being held accountable when prompted. Officials aren't answering whether or not people are being held accountable. And I think many Minnesotans are taking that to mean no. And so if you have officers committing crimes like acts of violence against citizens, and there's not a clear, there's no signs that they're being held accountable, I think that leads to a lot of distrust with a lot of people. And this could be, a policy problem, or it could be a communication problem. I'm not completely sure. But I think seeing some protests was very expected. Whether or not it'll happen here in Florida, it's yet to be seen. I think there need to be an incident, some kind of instigator. When stuff is happening in the background, people don't usually come out in massive droves like they do in Minneapolis. There's usually a powder keg that goes off.
And that's what I think is, you're saying that we'll see what happens in Florida.
Yeah.
I don't see it happening in Florida.
I don't see it happening in Florida without, unless there's like some big incident.
We have leadership here in Florida with Governor DeSantis, that just will not tolerate this. We have Walz and Mayor Fry who are encouraging it and not toning it down. And now Walz comes out saying that, I encourage peaceful protest, but the church protest, I call it a riot, went too far. I don't think that there's any leadership, and we're talking about distrust in our government. The distrust is with the leadership in Minnesota. They're already in shambles right now with everything that's going on with the flood situation, and now they have this toppled. They are not toning down anything.
Sure,
okay?
I agree.
I think there's some substance.
They have failed. Minnesota has been in the same situation back, since 2020. And have they learned? I don't think so. I think that we're talking about has the protest been mostly peaceful? We saw that same argument come out of the BLM, right? And it started, and then we saw what that resulted in.
Sure.
The same thing going on right now. There was a situation where these protesters are breaking into federal agents' cars and vandalizing and stealing documents. They're throwing cocktails at them. They're throwing ice water bottles at them that act as rocks. I mean, these people are not, and they're very organized too. They're very,
they are.
It is very, in the sense of, people are suggesting that it's paid and that it's from something that's higher up and that is being egged on, and so we're talking about leadership. I don't think this is coming from the ICE agents. I don't think this is coming from the administration. I believe that this is coming from the people on the ground in Minnesota and the leadership. So my question is that the onus has to be on the people who are continuing to have the rhetoric of, oh, if you're going to be arrested if you're brown or if you're black or any of this. It's that is causing fear, and that is the distrust. not the distrust in Trump or the distrust in
I think there's layers to this, and I think there's more than just local leadership, right? You also have to, what's the difference between Minnesota and Florida? You also got to consider political culture. Florida is very traditionalistic. It's a lot of its citizens are not as directly affected by this. There hasn't been issues with law enforcement as much, and also you got to remember it's way more conservative. The approval rating of this type of action is higher in Florida. I think the political culture in Florida is the biggest obstacle to protests in Florida, not necessarily that our law enforcement is that much more aggressive. And looking over at Minnesota, and looking at protests in the past, again, what is true of individuals in a group is not always true of a group as a whole. Again, we have up to 10,000 members, and right now the protests there are currently less than 100 who are actually facing charges. Again, there's been instances of the rock throwing, but again, it's mostly been in small bands, and it's exclusively, you find it only on the front band. Unlike some BLM protests that turn sour, there hasn't been severe looting. There hasn't been, again, outside of a handful of ICE agents' cars, there hasn't been severe trespass of other people's property. Go on, David.
I just want to add 2 points to what the two of you are saying. The first point is that I have not heard, whether it's from the governor or the Mayor Frye, Governor Walz, in their conversations with the media to the public, that they tell them, if these are your options, you have the right to self-deport. And these are the consequences if you decide not to. The second point I wanted to make in regards to the culture, again, Kellen, as you were saying, Minneapolis in particular, is very liberal. And so they, members of the Minneapolis community who are adamantly against ICE involvement have it in their minds that there is no accountability legally to ICE, and that the government has given them cover.
Yeah, and again, put yourself in their shoes. You don't not necessarily asking you to agree, but just put yourself in their shoes, right? Many Minnesotans generally, compared to a lot of states, from the statistics I looked at yesterday, have a higher trust in their own government. So their focus isn't on walls and free in the way that maybe Sean's might be. Their concerns is are the the bad apples in ICE being held accountable? And when Noam responds that she will not comment on it, that's setting off a lot of alarm bells. Again, I think what this is a result of is fear. How rational is or not, we'll know more as time develops.
And where's the fear? Who is igniting the fear? Who's instigating it? I want to open the conversation.
There's layers. There's the ICE agents, who put people in chokeholds. Just last week we had somebody in Minnesota, a 16-year-old who was in handcuffs but was also choked after the fact. That happened in Minnesota. You had someone who was shot. So you have those incidents. Then you have people who report on them, some of whom will use very splashy headlines, and that will, give people a very strong impression. Then you also have members of the community, some of whom will exaggerate the fear, exaggerate what happens. And then, of course, you have the Trump administration itself, whose response I don't think was as good as it should have been. Again, the implication was that they weren't going to do anything about incidents like this. That was what a lot of people got. So I think there's layers of accountability here. I think at any point the buck could have been stopped or at least reduced, but it hasn't.
I think Kevin has something to say.
Yeah, I would like to open the conversation.
Okay.
Kevin,
So I was gonna. Okay, sorry.
I was going to ask you a question first, and you can respond. Kevin, the governor's office is touting 10,000 arrests since April. Many on the right are saying this is finally the rule of law being restored. How do you respond to this unrest we were just discussing? And then if you can tie that in again to what's happening here in Central Florida, or is about to happen, and everything we've discussed so far. I just want to get you into the conversation before we move on to our next segment.
Okay. So I did a little research this morning about this, and the governor office touting the 10,000 arrests is in reference to Governor DeSantis's own local program under Operation Tidal Wave. And I think that there's an interesting, obviously you have the big statistic, 10,000 arrests. But my question is, what are those arrests for? Are they, are we taking dangerous, violent criminals off the street? I would hope so. I would hope that that's what the priority's on. But if the administration isn't necessarily like going after the violent offenders first, then I would question whether this is the effective strategy or if it's really just like a terror tactic on immigrant communities.
Who are they going after? If it's not the violent offenders, we have child rapists.
Well, that's the thing.
Sure.
Think about Central Florida for a second here. What are most? I mean, there's not a lot of our major like Latino immigrant community is Puerto Ricans that are citizens. Even if a Puerto Rican person like commits a violent crime, that doesn't necessarily mean that we deport them. You can't deport them. They're United States citizens. They'd be tried as as citizens. So I guess the question is, of course, you have other immigrant communities. It's a very diverse area, but the question is, are these arrests really just show arrests to create like a chilling effect among communities and like put people in line? And I think that's what we're seeing in Minnesota. I think in Minnesota, the administration is kind of testing boundaries. Like they, a very similar way to what they did during the George Floyd, aftermath, where you have a community that is grieved, has grievances against the government, and maybe there are legitimately violent bad actors in those communities, but on the flip side, as Kellen mentioned, you also have a situation that the administration could calm things down. Christian Nome could go out there.
I'm sorry, Kevin. Where are these grievances coming from? You're mentioning grievances. There was an ICE agent who came into Minneapolis, again, obstructed by these rioters. Yeah. He rolled out his window. He's what I can ascertain is of maybe Hispanic descent. He certainly did not look white to me. Not that matters, but again, you're like the instigation and these grievances are coming from the left. They're saying that all ICE agents are racist and they're rounding up anyone who's not white. That is not happening. He rolled down his window and he said, "You guys are obstructing our pathway. We're trying to arrest a child rapist." These are not just everyone who's just owning mom and pop shops and contributing to the economy and doing their no. What they're trying to do, what their objective is doing, is to take off the most violent off our streets first. That is what they're trying to do. So the grievance argument is it's coming from the left, and the left needs to tone it down. The administration is only doubling down because they are sick and tired of these people who are obstructing actual work they're trying to do.
If I may, Sean, interject with a little bit over here. There's been some people, relatively close to my family, not super close, we're not like family. I wouldn't consider family friends, who are in ICE facilities right now in Tallahassee. They were not criminals aside from overstaying their visas. They had no other criminal charges. They're just people who work in restaurants here in Brevard County, which is an area. If you go to downtown Melbourne or you go to Central Merritt Island, these are or downtown Cocoa. These are places where you find severe crime, very bad crime. It's horrid over there. One of the main businesses is bail bonds in Cocoa. So you have a lot of crime in these areas. But the primary recipients here, we haven't had many full ICE raids, so we haven't had that many in all fairness. But the primary people receiving the brunt of it is restaurant workers, simply because that's a business where high density of immigrants are. It wasn't any further criminal inquiries. And you said one example of a grievance. Here's an example of ICE not toning it down the way they should have in Minnesota on Friday during the riots. There was a citizen, somebody who was driving. They were trying to get around the protest, but they didn't know where to go. They took a wrong turn, and they were stopped by ICE agents. This person's not an immigrant. They're born here. The ICE agents knew that. Now, 3 ICE agents come over. They talk to her. This is somebody who is autistic, has a slight hearing disability, and a neuromotor functionality impairments with the quads and glutes. So very bad balance. They can drive because they can move their foot up and down. She was confused about who was talking to her because she didn't see who the masks were. And when she wasn't following the directions, she was like doing this, trying to figure out who was talking to her. Her windows were smashed. Her seatbelts were cut. She was thrown on the ground, and when she was brought to a facility, she requested disability accommodations because of her balance. She wasn't put in a chair or given a wheelchair or a cane or anything. She asked if they had a wheelchair on hand. They told her that they did, but she wasn't getting it. And it got to the point where she passed out and had to go to the hospital because her knees locked and she cut off blood flow to her brain. And there was kind of an example there where this person wasn't even involved with the protest. This person wasn't doing anything. This person wasn't a criminal. They were literally just passing through and were confused about where they were supposed to drive to get around ICE. And rather than trying to communicate with this person, it devolved into an ugly incident. And look, what happens in one single incident never defines the whole thing. Same with one. It's the same with the shovel hitting, right? That doesn't define all of the protesters. One incident doesn't define anything.
Can we hear what Kevin was going to say in response to you?
Yes. Sorry.
Sean?
Yeah. I was going to go back to the original grievance is that, Rene Good got shot in the head while trying to make a 3-point turn. I mean, if you watch, there's a lot of different, originally there were like different angles and different coverage of that event. You watch the first one and it's like, okay, maybe you could kind of see how like the agents thought that, she was like an agitator and was violent. But then you watch the second video that the Trump administration released and you have, Renee saying, I'm basically trying to de-escalate the situation and like a leave because she's trying to like get to where she's going. There's an immigration raid going on in her front yard. She's probably just trying to get to work or whatever. And, she says like, I'm not mad at you. I'm trying to, just tries to escalate things. And then she gets shot in the head and the officer says, fucking bitch. That's what she said. So like, I think it shows that a lot of these ICE agents who aren't as well trained as like normal police officers, they have like 5 to 7 weeks of training. They don't have the same jurisdictional capabilities that like police officers do. They don't have the same force training, but you have these people that are being dispatched across the country to communities that they don't even serve. They have no connection to these areas and they're, brutalizing people. And I think it's understandable that people would be upset about that. I mean, do I think that's going to happen in Central Florida? No, because I think Central Florida is a place that doesn't have the same political impetus to focus on it. Because like there's already a focus in Minneapolis. There was with the Nick Shirley stuff and the Somali fraud scandal.
I have just 2 very quick points to add on as far as the Rene Good shooting goes. One, this was actually one of those cases where this was a long-time agent. This was an agent of I think 7 years.
Okay.
That training issue crops up. It wasn't really cropping up in this case. And as far as the shooting goes, the first shot may or may not be defensible. The second shot is not defensible because you're not allowed to use lethal force against somebody who's running away and not wielding a weapon. And I think, again, a lot of it came down to communication. An hour after it happened, we were told, Kristi Noem said that it wasn't even real. That was what she told the press, that this didn't even happen. And then when, the footage was released, they said, okay, we're going to investigate it. And then for a whopping 2 days, they were investigating the agent. And now, instead of investigating the agent, they're investigating Rene Good's family members, which some legal analysts have suggested might be an intimidation tactic to just try to make the issue go away. Communication, I would say, we talk about policy, right? Right? What's the policy effect of it? But it's also important to remember, what's the impression people get? What is perception? Because that is also a component of reality, and that's what drives action more than any actual data.
I would like to get David, if you have anything to contribute on this discussion, and then I'll get my final thoughts before we move to our second segment, because we'd like to discuss how this relates here at home.
Right. I have in the tank a blog post and a podcast episode in regards to that particular incident that I've just let sit because it's a lot of work. And as more evidence come out, I was pretty much satisfied not to make an immediate, reaction post or anything like that. It's like, let me take some time and let it come to me. And in regards to the Rene Nicole Good situation, there were multiple multiple camera views, and the one that settled it for me was the camera view from the officer himself, the agent himself, Agent Ross, and she came at him from my point of view and my experience working with law enforcement. That lethal force was allowable. As a matter of fact, there's a statute that the federal government can use in support of his action. And then there are several statutes that if Miss Good had survived, she could have been charged under state statute for impeding an investigation. Her partner was Goldie, the agent Ross. She wasn't, leaving for work or picking up her kids. She was there as an agitator, and there's consequences to her actions. I've protested in my youth, 30, 25, 20 years ago. And so I know there's a line that I could not cross. There was a line that was crossed in this particular situation. It's unfortunate that it happened. However, it happened. Also, one important thing, people like to go back to, well, ICE is supposed to get the most dangerous non-residents or illegal residents first. Well, the president did say they were going to go after the worst of the worst, the bad of the bad, whatever. However, he also said we're getting everyone who's here.
Right. It was never exclusive.
Out of here. So if I know that, okay, there's someone that lives 2 doors down who is an illegal resident and they have a crime, okay. If they didn't have a crime, they have committed a crime, okay, they're eventually will have to leave, and that's just the bottom line. So that's my point of view. And people say, oh, you're supposed to get the worst of the worst first. No, not really. No, all 22 million illegal residents are to, like I said in the beginning, either self-deport or be deported.
And if we didn't have Biden mess this whole thing up for us, we wouldn't be in this predicament. And before I move on next, just what David was saying, we have our defund ICE. Same thing didn't work for the Democrats when they said defund the police. We're back here. You do not learn. They do not learn. They do not tone it down. And you're talking about Rene Good and these poor people. Don't impede on investigations, federal investigations. What do you think is going to happen? Just as David said, there is a difference between peaceful protesting, which of course you're allowed to do, and going into here and storming your car act, and then, oh, I'm the victim. You're not the victim, Miss Rene Good. You're not. And I'm sorry, it's a tragedy that it happened, a tragedy if they want to call it. In my personal opinion, it's not a tragedy. This is what happens when you impede on these investigations.
Yeah.
We're in such a tense part of our country right now, and I respect all of you guys. I'm not trying to get heated, and I respect all of our different opinions, but we're in such a tense part of our country that we have to tone it down, and that starts with the people who are instigating these violences. I don't see anyone, the Proud Boys or anyone on the right, storming synagogues, or if they're storming mosques or any of that. But no, I see people on the left storming churches. And so I'm just looking at what's happening. It's like we have to cool it down, but it starts with these people, and you have to organize your protests in a way that's very peaceful. And if you have your opinions on ICE, great. But when you're going and trying to stop their cars, you see the videos. They're stopping the cars. They're getting. And then what do you think these ICE agents are going to do? You say they're not. These are people who are just going in and trying to do their job. Yeah, you have people out here, mostly white people, right?
Yeah.
Trying to act the community, and it's like, I mean, I just think we're at a point. I want to bring it to Central Florida though, because this isn't just a border issue; it's a neighborhood issue. And Representative Maxwell Frost has confirmed that ICE is securing large hotel reservations in Winter Garden, Altamont Springs, and right here in East Orlando near UCF. Meanwhile, Florida CFO Blazing Golia says the goal is ridding our communities of breaking the law.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn it to David. You tend to look at the logistics. We have ICE agents staying in the same hotels where tourists and families sleep. We have Congressman Darren Soto posting Know Your Right guides while the governor celebrates 1,000 voluntary returns. Is this operation sustainable, or is the tidal wave going to drown Central Florida's local economy, as those on the left suggest, and social cohesion? Are we going to basically result in another Minneapolis? We were talking about this before, but now with the hotel reservations, our economy here in Orlando is tourism. I mean, what does this mean for Orlando?
The economy is going to be fine. If the economy was able to survive COVID, it'll survive the very few, however, loud voices that are asking the government, local government here in Orange County, to go against an agreement that the county made in regards to cooperating with ICE to not allow ICE to use a building operated by a private entity to detain ICE detainees. They are asking for, and I see this on Reddit, I'm watching, they are actively talking about disruption, impeding investigations, and the tone is violent. I'm not using hyperbole. Maybe they are, but this is what's happening. And again, I hear what Representative Frost said. I heard what Representative Soto said. Representative Soto's right. We all have some foundation of rights. And yes, legal residents and illegal residents have rights. Businesses run by legal residents and businesses run by illegal residents have rights. They should know, we all should know our rights, starting with the Constitution. Understanding the Constitution.
All persons.
Second, in regards to Representative Maxwell Frost and those who, are saying the similar things that he's saying, they failed to talk about the one thing that has been set forth, and I've said this before, and I'm going to say it over and over again. You have the right to self-deport. Those Venezuelans who had TPS status that has been revoked by the federal government, and again, supported by the Supreme Court of these United States, you now have an opportunity to self-deport.
Sure.
You may not like what happened in Venezuela or how it turned out. However, things have changed. Your safety has been guaranteed by the United States government. Political prisoners have been released. Go home. And so when the hyperbole from the left says it's going to affect our local economy, no, it's not. No, it's not. People are still going to come to Central Florida. They're going to enjoy the theme parks. They're going to enjoy the Florida weather. And what has been made very clear by the governor, by Egolia, and by other elected officers here in Florida is that we're not standing for this nonsense. There will be consequences. This is a state of laws and regulations, and we are going to abide by those laws and regulations. If you don't like it, you can leave. You can self-deport from Florida. There's some things I don't like about what's going on. However, for decades, and I go back to the commission that President Clinton, the first Black president, the commission that he created with Representative Barbara Jordan of Texas was co-chair, the Commission on Immigration. And in that commission, it said, we need to address this now before it gets out of hand. And decades later, it has gotten out of hand.
I don't see this coming out of Florida yet, and we'll see how Operation Tidal Wave operates, right? But what
We'll
I'm
have incidents. We'll have an incident or two because there's ignorant people
Maybe.
out there.
Of course there are, but it will be cracked down, unlike what's happening in Minnesota, because they just
Mhm.
don't care. I think, Dave, you made an excellent point about the economy. I don't see the economy changing. I think the
Yeah.
economy will do fine. I think almost it's a racist narrative to suggest that if you kick out those who are non-white, then our economy is going to crumble because they work our service
It's
jobs
racist.
and our agriculture. And you know what? That may be true that they do work those jobs.
Literally true.
Slave wages. They are not legal. So they don't need to, they can be paid under the buck. They're not being paid the wages that American would deserve, that they call for. So they're not even being paid. And so the left is arguing, let's keep them in this country so we can pay them slave wages. It's ridiculous. It's so played out. And I think at this point, I mean, we'll see what's going to happen. I don't think that Florida is going to go to the same level. I want to open this to the rest of the panel, and I will make a point, and you guys can respond to everything.
May I add
can we add
one more thing,
things?
because I think this is important for
Yes.
Kellen and Kevin and even you, Sean, to answer. You brought up in a way, what's the end game? The end game is going to be, and this already legislation here in Florida, that any public money that used to go to services for illegal migrants, illegal residents, illegal aliens here in Florida, that's going to dry up in a hurry. So when the money's gone, then what? Are all these people who are hooting and hollering about we need to support our, immigrant community, are they going to take them in? Are they going to feed them? There's an end game. That end game is not affordable.
Yeah. I'd like to add on just a couple things as well. What impact ICE will or will not have on our community and our tourism will depend on how long they linger here. Like how long will this operation last? There will obviously be some lingering presence. There'll always be some lingering presence. But how long, are we going to have this more full force thing, right? Right now, we're in kind of a dormant season, right? If someone's in, if they're in hotels where tourists and families stay, there's not that many right now. They're not taking up a lot of space that would be occupied otherwise. And there's not a lot of international visitors, because if there's something that impacts us, it's not going to be data, it's going to be perception. Will international visitors be worried that they might encounter ICE? There's been a couple incidents. Again, perception will be the important thing here. But here's the thing: if the main of their operation is done by the time tourism season kicks back up, then absolutely there'll be no problem. If they linger here for a long time, there might.
ICE just yesterday, in the last 48 hours, had an investigation on the Disney property. It wasn't where guests were. However, they did detain many Disney workers who were illegal aliens.
Yes.
So it's happening.
It is. And again, I think as long as what is done quickly, then during prime tourism, I wouldn't imagine a big issue. Like, it's Disney time to replace their employees, and that gives international visitors peace of mind if for some reason they don't have it.
I want to bring Kevin into the point and into the discussion, and then I have one more question.
Okay. I want to kind of jump off what Kellen said about like the timing, and I think also what's important is the visibility of all this, because this goes for nationwide, this goes historical, but like ICE isn't new. It's been around for a long time. I mean, there was ICE under Obama, there was ICE under Biden. I mean, there was operations being done throughout all the time. I mean, no president really is, even you say that this is Biden put us in the mess, but like ICE still did operations under Biden's leadership. But the difference with Trump and his relationship to ICE is that, from what my perspective, is that ICE is being used as a sense of like, it's being used incredibly visibly and incredibly aggressively as a way to kind of manipulate public opinion, or create a sense of like fear and distrust. Like, if there's ICE agents in Central Florida that are just doing like routine operations, that are doing it kind of quiet under the bus, go in, grab the illegals, take them to places, whatever. deport them, then I don't think that's going to cause a reaction. I do think that what I would see is going to cause a flashpoint is if an ICE agent detains like a Puerto Rican in a heavily Puerto Rican community, probably by mistake, but I could see that becoming a flashpoint for protests if like the community themselves feel like they're on the back foot the same way that people in Minneapolis feel like they're on the back foot.
I could tell you that they're pretty clear on the community where
Okay.
where likely there are a large illegal demographic. I can tell you that from personal anecdotal information that some of the conversation among the illegal community here is that, oh, it's not going to happen to me, and it's going to get the next person. It's not going to affect me. There again, personal anecdotal information. It's been a wake up call in certain illegal communities. I think the Democrats here, the liberals here, have definitely embraced themselves and wrapped themselves in the rhetoric of allowing illegal aliens here. We have a state rep candidate, Samuel Viches Santiago, who's wrapped himself in the Venezuelan flag and have made public comments, op-ed comment with the Orlando Sentinel, pushing back on the administration, the government's decision to withdraw TPS status for Venezuelans. So Samuel has put a spotlight on the Venezuelan community. I recommend that, Samuel, go back to his home country and be the leader that they deserve with his experience, organizing and leading the local Democrats, his education at Oxford and Princeton. They need a leader like him. He should lead the charge
he would be valuable
Venezuelans to go back and make Venezuela great again.
I have one more question to the panel before we move on to our next segment.
Okay.
We're wrapping up soon. And this goes along what we're saying. So we're talking about demographics, and David said, we know the communities. They're being tactful, and you can't underestimate ICE, where I feel like we're acting like ICE are such novices at what they're doing, and they're really not. It makes it seem that they're in this situation because of those who are impeding them and undermining them. In Kissimmee, we know the demographics that are there. My question is to the panel, and you each can take a turn. Is this surgical enforcement, or is this a dragnet approach? Is this something that is a systematic, search for criminal activity, or is this something that's just like, whatever, like we're here, we're just gonna round everybody up and do whatever we want to do? Like, how organized is this? And I would like to see, whoever wants to start first, what's your opinion on something
the Disney, investigation was definitely organized. And there are certain packets of communities here in any jurisdiction where you're going to find, illegal aliens, and that's no stranger to our Census Bureau, to our local government, to the IRS, and to ICE. So they're in my opinion, and I'm not, in constant conversation with ICE. However, there is some rhyme, there's some rhyme to their madness, so to speak. There are legitimate investigations, and sometimes investigations will take you in other directions. Again, this is based on my own personal professional relationship with local law enforcement and how they operated when I was in Illinois.
Kellen?
Yeah. As far as crime is concerned, I've been really looking more into like the crime statistics in different areas in Florida. You find your Kissimmee crime rates in many places in Florida. You find it in Miami, you find it in Tampa, you find it in Melbourne, you find it actually worse in Tallahassee of all places. Why they're there, of course, is because of demographics. I don't think it's more complicated than that. Again, this is crime that you find this is a crime rate you find in many places in Florida. It's a larger patch than most places in Florida as far as crime, but it's has a very concentrated demographic of Hispanics, which means if you're an ICE agent and your mission is to only go for illegal immigrants, you're going to have a higher success. The two places you're going to have the best success rate are going to be Kissimmee and Miami. Other than that, a lot of that crime is not being done by illegal immigrants. So I do believe that the reason they're there is demographics, and I don't believe it is more complicated than that. And David's right. There's organization to it. The Disney thing, without a doubt, organized. And I'm sure I'm guessing they're using mapping to systematically sweep, so to speak. That's what I would expect, but we'll see.
And Kevin, quick, and then we want to go to the next topic.
Okay. I'll talk about this more when we talk about the campus because that's what my experience is primarily. But I'll concede that generally the operation being done here seems like it's pretty, quiet and effective. It's not, this messy, violent takedown. It's pretty surgical. It's pretty intentional, and there's definitely a lot of little fear mongering, especially in people I know anecdotally that like today there was a CPB van in North Alafaya Trail, but okay, I don't really see why that in itself is anything that's a huge deal to worry about, to be honest. But I'll discuss my thoughts on that further in third section.
Okay, thank you. So perhaps nowhere is the heat felt more than University of Central Florida. Students are marching. The SDS, Students for a Democratic Society, or I would like to call them the Democratic Socialist, is demanding UCF end the 287G agreement. UCF ICE refers primarily to the controversial partnership between the University of Central Florida Police Department and the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, through the 287G program, granting campus police federal immigration enforcement power, sparking protests and concerns over student safety and rights. While ICE can also refer to the university's ICE Hockey Club or other academic initiatives, the 287G program allows UCF police to act as immigration agents, leading to distrust and fears among students and the community, especially after visa revocations and detentions in 2025. UCF police signed a 287 agreement authorizing the officers to perform the federal immigration enforcement, including arrests on campus. So the collaboration is being criticized for creating fear, discouraging crime reporting, and harming trust, with faculty senates calling for withdrawal from similar agreements. Now, some international students have had their visas revoked, with arrests occurring, raising, again, alarms about student safety and UCF's commitment to diversity. So I want to read a quote from the Nicholson Student Media Report that's out of UCF. Student organizer Polzer stated, "We want UCF to end the 287 agreement, which allows UCF PD to act as ICE agents. We're demanding our university start a legal defense fund and stop sharing students' private information with ICE." Okay, so Kellen, students, and I know we're all UCF graduates here. Not yet. Yeah. Me recent. Okay. Kellen, students are terrified that their GPA isn't the only thing the school is tracking, but their immigration status. Should a university be a safe harbor, or is that an unrealistic expectation for a state-funded institution?
From a purely legal perspective, you can't guarantee it. Ultimately what the state wants, the state will get one way or another. From a purely legal perspective, it's unrealistic. I mean, as a matter of moral perspective, maybe there's a bit more room to wiggle with there. And as far as the revoking goes, I'd be especially afraid as a UCF student, because the number one thing that keeps getting these visas revoked is parking tickets. If you know one thing about UCF, they love their parking tickets. So that's a big thing that tends to. And again, I think I mentioned this before. It's kind of one of my overall perceptions of all the controversies relating to ICE is data is only as important as the perception surrounding it, right? And a lot of the reports we've seen, and there's still a few people in Honduras, not El Salvador, their neighbor, who are in Honduras. These are students who were wrongfully deported, who still are not back in the U.S. Again, it's been ordered by judges that because they were mistakenly deported, they're still there. The executive branch still hasn't gotten them back, and that I think is a lot of what, at least from people I've spoken to, a lot of the worry is, sure, it's not super common that people get wrongfully deported, but what if it does happen to me or someone near me, that somebody is mistakenly deported and they get stuck in Honduras or Colombia or wherever they end up? What if you're part of that? And a small thing about UCF PD is a concern that may or may not be valid. We'll just have to see, is whether or not ultimately them being involved with doing ICE's job for them will distract them from their other duties, or whether or not they have enough time and resources available already to where it's not a big deal. We'll just have to see. But that's another potential thing to consider.
Kevin, the student democratic side says that UCF PD is being trained as ICE agents. Is it a conflict of interest and this goes back to what Kellen just said, is it a conflict of interest for campus police to enforce federal immigration law on their own students? Is there enough resources? Is this taking away from the other duties, as Kellen just said, to protect the university itself? I think, in my own perspective, yes, enforcing federal immigration law is protecting the campus. We don't know who's on the campus. We don't know criminals are roaming around. I think that they have every right to do so under this agreement. But Kevin, what's your thoughts on that?
Okay, I actually have a pretty nuanced take on this particular issue. I did some research this morning and I figured out some real nuance to the situation being discussed. I would actually say that I'd rather have UCF PD doing immigration enforcement on campus than ICE agents. I think one of my large problems with how ICE does its operations in general is I see it as an occupying force. You're taking people from other places and you're putting them in communities that they have no actual attachment to and no accountability to, and having them do these operations. Like UCF PD is accountable to the students and to the board of trustees of the school and to
know who they are.
UCF PD. We know they are. I mean, I work at the arena. I know these people. I talk to UCF PD most days. I at least know who they are and know their names. Like, if someone's got to do this job, because like you said, the state's going to do what the state's going to do. Whether I agree with that or isn't really relevant. I would rather have UCF PD doing that than just like a bunch of ICE agents from Oklahoma storming into my campus. I do think that I also think that some of what the SDS says about like UCF PD being trained as ICE agents is kind of hyperbolic. Like, they're not ICE agents. Like, no, they don't have the same. I mean, okay, can they do a couple immigration related arrests or whatever? Maybe that's what it is. But like, from what my research was, it was like they do a little course. It's nothing like, it's not giving them the jurisdiction to truly, be ICE agents.
They're almost more like a notifying force.
Yeah.
They outline suspects for ICE.
I want to ask David, and I think you made a great point, Kevin. I appreciate the nuance there. I actually think that we were talking about ICE agents. Either it was Kellen or Kevin who mentioned the point of being ICE agents basically are not the same level as police. They don't have the same capability or training. But then we're saying that UCF PD should be in the place of ICE agents, at least they're better. I don't think that UCF PD, in my opinion, honestly has the capabilities to do this. I think that honestly, if ICE wants to do a raid on UCF's campus, they have every right to do so, because American universities should be for legal citizens. I'm sorry, but like, this is the thing. It's like we're outsourcing all these jobs. I mean, we need American jobs for American citizens. I'm going to put the last question to David, and then we're going to wrap it up. And then because we're almost done here, but David, just with everything we're discussing, I mean, UCF PD, ICE agents. I mean, what's going on with UCF? What should we do with UCF's population?
So my understanding of the 287 agreement, there's specific responsibilities that are detailed in that agreement. And it pretty much is just saying, hey, if you encounter an illegal alien, you take them into custody, you hold on to them, you transport them to the detention center, and that's about it.
Yeah.
If it's in the course of regular business for that particular law enforcement agency, should you leave that to security or campus police? If they come across someone who has committed a violation of campus policy or committed a crime, there's protocol. And if that protocol includes the agreement, the 287 agreement, then they follow that protocol and they hand over that particular individual to ICE. Again, ICE, granted, they do get training. Let's make that very clear. It may not be the 18 weeks of training, but it's 7 weeks of intensive training, period. Okay. And so we may not care for who is applying to be an ICE agent. However, they have to meet a certain criteria. They have an ethic code. They have a code of ethics. They have protocols, and given the tension, everything's not going to work out perfectly. We can't expect, an ICE agent to be perfect every time, given circumstances changing day to day, hour by hour, minute by minute. I don't expect when I was, in school as a college student, my professor to be on his or her game every single day. We're human. However, there are laws, regulations, and rules that are supposedly followed. There are commissioners, there are legislators who don't follow the rules completely. It's human nature. However, at the end of the day, what ICE is doing is what they're supposed to be hired to do. Keep the streets safe.
That's not only an astute point, David, it's common sense. It's not going to be perfect. This operation is not going to be perfect. We're trying to do our best, but then when people impede on these investigations, how do you think as a human being, you have fear, you have uncertainties? We've seen this 5 years ago in Minnesota, again, with the BLM riots and across the nation. And now we're seeing it again. What do you think these people are thinking? I just want to wrap it up here. I think we've had a great discussion. As we see these shifts in our community, people leaving, voluntary returns, and the massive federal spend on these raids, the landscape of how we live and trade is changing. People are looking for autonomy and security outside of traditional systems that feel increasingly volatile. That's why I'm excited to announce my upcoming show, The King Exchange, launching early February. We're going to be talking about leadership, sovereignty, and navigating this new American era. And we'll have multiple guests. I will be joined, of course, by Kellen and Kevin, and we'll have multiple guest debates and everything that you expect. It's going to be fun, and I'm super excited. And speaking of navigating the new era, you need to check out J&Washington's T8020 token and exchange. In a world where tidal waves can disrupt local economies overnight, the T8020 offers a different kind of stability. It's about building a community-driven financial future. You can see what they're building at j-washington.com/T8020. Whether you're concerned about the economy or just looking for the next breakthrough in the exchange market, that's where you need to be. Okay, so 10,000 arrests, 1,000 voluntary departures, a campus protest, and a city watching hotel rooms filled with federal agents. A lot going on here in Florida. Whether you see operational tidal wave as a restoration of order or a destruction of a community, one thing is certain. Florida is the laboratory for the future of American immigration. Okay, I'll give you each about a minute for closing thoughts. And I'd like to, again, thank you all for joining me. So we'll go around and start with Kevin.
Okay. I think I've stated most of what I've wanted to say throughout this interview. It's been great. It's been a great process. I think that even though a lot of what ICE is doing is technically legal, I think that my warning to people in general, the American people, Floridians, is that, the government doesn't always necessarily have your best interest in mind. We were founded under the idea of a consent of the governed, And I mean, if you look at like what Thomas Jefferson says, the people should not live in fear of their government. The government should live in fear of their people. And I think that when you have like, federal law enforcement being used in the way that it's been used, it's not that it's unconstitutional or illegal because the mechanisms do exist. But I think it can establish a dangerous precedent that, we don't necessarily know the ramifications yet, and we won't know for many years.
Kellen?
Yeah, okay, yeah, I'll go next. Again, I think I'm with David to the extent that I don't expect ICE to be perfect, and things will happen. However, and they do have some training. However, when things do go wrong, and as you go, it's important to accrue that experience and put corrections where corrections are due. We now know that ICE is not keeping full written record of things that are being done. Very incomplete compared to most police departments. These people are wearing masks, and when asked, whether people choking already detained people are going to be punished, the administration refuses to comment. The thing about accountability is the more people get away with something, the more people will try to get away with it again. It's not going to be perfect. And Kevin's right, most of this generally perfectly legal. But when crimes do arise, whether it's protesters, whether it's ICE agents, or whether it's passerby, whoever it is committing the crime, you have to hold them all accountable. You have to look at all of them within the same lens. None of it comes from just one side or the other. And it's a perception that it is coming from one side is how you get blind to a lot of the issues happening right next door to you. It's important to have accountability, again, no matter who they are, especially if they are in law enforcement. And of course, Sean, thank you for hosting this discussion. This, I think, has been tremendously informative. I now know David's takes.
And David, to wrap it all up.
Sure. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. Remember, the government is not this faceless big brother entity.
Yeah,
the government is me, you, our mothers, fathers, our brothers, sisters, cousins, aunts, nieces, grandparents. They're our neighbors, and they're the people we associate ourselves with. So when we talk about the government this, the government that, it's people that we know, people that we interact with every day, real human beings, U.S. citizens. And so what I like to leave, again, I'll go right back to the beginning. As a former government employee, a former Peace Corps volunteer who's lived close to a year in Thailand, as a father, as a politico, as someone who was an agitator many, many years ago, an activist, an advocate, someone who worked for government and actually work with law enforcement to keep children safe, to keep families together. I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot in the immigrant community. And there's nuance. And unfortunately, the legacy media is not giving us that. They're giving us the red meat.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we get emotional. And I'm asking people to take a step back in this conversation and let the information come to you, the facts, and move from there. And let's have a tactful, respectful conversation. So please comment.
Okay, so David,
and one more time, one more last thing. Again, self-deport or be deported.
Period. David, Kellen, and Kevin, thank you for the heated but necessary discussion. Of course, thank you guys so much. We'll keep tracking the movements in Winter Garden and Kissimmee and all over. Make sure to subscribe to stay updated on this unfolding situation. I'm Sean, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks,
Kevin.
Thank you.
Kellen.
Hey guys, post-production Kellen here, and I just wanted to add some notes in the aftermath of the most recent ICE incident, the Alex Preddy shooting, because I think it illustrates the overall problem with ICE and what makes it indefensible in its current state of operation. So, as soon as the incident happened, we were told by Kristi Noem and other high-ranking officials of the Department of Homeland Security that a man approached ICE officers,
9mm pistol in hand with the intention of killing as many people as possible. This was a domestic terrorist. Then the videos came out, and we discovered a couple things. One, he did not have a 9mm pistol in his hand. He had a phone in his hand. He had a phone. He didn't even approach the officers either. The officers approached him. And that was only because he was helping a woman stand up who was pushed down into the snow. This person wasn't an immigrant. They were just pushed over by an ICE agent. I don't know why, and I don't really care why. And then the officers, we were also told the officers were in severe danger, but the fact of the matter is they were not. They had only multiple officers pinning him to the ground. They not only pepper sprayed him, they covered his face in pepper spray. They not only pistol whipped him in the face over 5 times, but they took the gun, because he did have a gun. It was in a holster. He had he had like a carrying license. They took the gun out of the holster. And then only after that did they shoot him in the back of the head, mafia style. They didn't just shoot him either. They shot him over 10 times. 1 bullet to the back of the head kills somebody. At that point, they were just mutilating a corpse while the world was watching. And the Department of Homeland Security very blatantly lied just to cover up what their agents did. Almost every part of their story was completely manufactured and absolutely contrary to what really happened. Now, what does the administration plan to do about this? Basically, jack all. The first thing they've done is just blame the victim. It was the victim's fault that an ICE agent approached him and attacked him. It was his fault. And not only that, but they haven't even punished any of the ICE agents. I don't think they have any intention to, but they have detained several witnesses. Not people involved, not immigrants, not even criminals, but they started detaining witnesses who had cameras under a bogus charge of inciting a riot for simply watching them do what they did. And of course, some of them also insulted the agents after it happened. But fun fact, it is your First Amendment right to insult law enforcement. Anybody who says otherwise is kidding themselves and just wishes that it was a crime. It's not real crime. And the Department of Homeland Security and the administration has taken an extraordinary step with how they're going to process this. That is, these criminal charges, probably for first-degree murder, are going to be handled not via the FBI, where all federal cases are supposed to be held, but from an internal investigation from the same leadership that lied to cover these people's asses. The Department of Homeland Security is absolutely incapable of being neutral in this, because if they do put charges against their own people, that's a reflection on them. Nothing will come of this internal investigation, no matter what the facts of the case are. And that is the crux of the issue here. Most people who support ICE do so under the justification of law and order, of, hey, regardless of what further crimes you've committed as an immigrant, if you came here illegally, that's a crime. We're law-abiding in this country, and you should leave for that reason, right? It's this idea that we're law-abiding in this country. But for some reason, when our own law enforcement breaks the law, even laws as bad as first-degree murder or using aggressive force, like committing battery against people who are already in handcuffs. Keep in mind, we still have over 20 cases of officers choking people after they put them in handcuffs for reasons, even though choking at all is a crime. No matter what the crime is, we have yet to have a case of any of these people actually being punished for committing crimes on camera for the world to see. And sure, ICE has an official policy of nonviolence, of preserving rights and keeping the streets safe. But if violation of that conduct, violation of that policy is enforced 0% of the time, then the policy de facto doesn't exist. It doesn't matter to the leadership. And look, ICE as a general group and the majority of the people there can be nonviolent. They can be non-threatening. They can do their jobs perfectly fine. But the leadership of ICE is perfectly okay if there is violence. It is completely acceptable to them because they are unwilling to do anything about it. And that is indefensible.
So, ask the hard question no one wants to answer honestly. Should illegal aliens who violated U.S. law just by being here receive the same level of due process as American citizens? Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has made it clear arrests are coming, including for those who believe hiding behind churches or protests makes them untouchable. The law still matters, or at least it should. This isn't about race. This isn't about cruelty. This is about sovereignty, public safety, and the basic expectation that a nation protects its own citizens first. If enforcing immigration law is controversial, that tells you how far the country has drifted. What we're watching unfold right now isn't just an immigration debate, it's a full-blown moral inversion. Today, federal authorities announced arrests of illegal alien men involved in horrific crimes, sexual assault, drug trafficking, violence. These aren't asylum seekers, these aren't families, these are criminal men who never should have been here in the first place. And yet, the loudest defenders of these criminals are ICE rioters, overwhelmingly women who claim to hate toxic masculinity, hate American men, hate law enforcement, but will line up instantly to defend illegal alien men with documented criminal records. That contradiction matters. Because while these activists scream about compassion, they're defending men who prey on women and children, often from their own communities. The same Hispanic communities ICE is accused of targeting are the very communities being victimized by these criminals. Let's talk about the children. ICE isn't hunting kids. ICE is rescuing children, many of them Hispanic, from trafficking, exploitation, and abuse. Yet the same activists rally behind slogans claiming ICE is racist or genocidal while ignoring the reality that illegal alien criminals disproportionately harm their own race. That's not compassion, that's willful blindness. And here's the part that should worry every American, citizen or not. American citizens are being treated the same as illegal aliens. Stopped, questioned, detained, their rights blurred in the chaos. When borders collapse and law enforcement is politicized, everyone loses protections. This was Sean, post-production, Operation Tidal Wave.